about is ever since the Global Methodist Church debuted, the United Methodist Church has had 3 bishops retire and leave the connection altogether. It happened first with Bishop Mike Lowry, who straight up gave his credentials up whenever the bishops wrote to him and said, hey, this is concerning your connections with the WCA and the GMC. And that was several months ago. And then there was Scott Jones, and I always liked Scott Jones. I remember a few years ago, people who didn't like the discipline were openly rebelling, and he said, you know what's going to happen if 200 clergy all perform gay marriages at the same time is we're going to have 200 trials immediately. We're going to exercise church discipline.
Right, and that was very memorable. The version I heard, somebody asked him first, what if a clergy performed a gay wedding?
Mm-hmm.
And he said, well, there would be a suspension from ministry followed by a church trial.
Mm-hmm.
And then that was followed up with, well, what if 100 clergy performed 100 gay weddings?
Mm-hmm.
And then, well,
and
then
I guess I just pumped it up to 200.
100%. There would be 100 suspensions for ministry followed by 100 church trials.
Yeah.
So yes, Bishop Jones is someone who is serious about the discipline. I had not heard that he is leaving the United Methodist Church, or officially, but that he was retiring. He announced his retirement, whereas his conference was hoping he would serve out another year or two.
No, I posted the wrong link where I had that. So anyway, I remember in 2019, one of the other things I wanted to lift up Scott Jones about was in 2019, the bishops had their plan for how they were going to force through the one church plan. You remember that?
Mm-hmm.
The traditional plan was not even presented by the Council of Bishops, even though it was the will of the General Conference, and everybody knew that beforehand. So the bishops, I forget who the president at that time was, but he misrepresented the conversations that they had privately that resulted in them not putting it forward. And Scott Jones came out saying, this is being misrepresented. Here's the conversation we actually had. Here's what actually happened. And then the rest ostensibly knew that the truth was not being told, and they stayed quiet. Nobody even came alongside Jones afterwards and said, yeah, he's telling the truth. He just stood on his own, And then the third one that just happened recently was Mark Webb. And I honestly didn't know much about Mark Webb. He was in the Northeast, but he aligned conservative. And it slips my mind whether Scott Jones and Mark Webb are going to be bishops in the GMC or not. But it is concerning that we've lost 3 bishops. It's concerning for institutionalists that we have any that would leave and think that the GMC has something to offer. But it's also disconcerting for traditionalists like me who already feel abandoned. Our biggest power players are leaving rather than stay behind to help everybody have an easy exit out. But I've read the statements from all 3 bishops that we'll post alongside this in the show notes. And all 3 just say, it's unmanageable. It's been bad for my spirit. I can't do this anymore, which certainly I identify with. But how many local pastors do you have serving whose consciences are wounded because they're belonging to an unfaithful covenant? So I just think we need bishops to lead with integrity and to bear that burden. And it seems like so many just aren't willing, whether they're conservative or liberal or centrist. In my mind, they get paid enough to deal with a heavier burden than I do. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if you saw, they just got a raise. Our GC and FNA gave them a raise. Apparently giving is still doing well in our denomination, even up from last year.
Until the disaffiliations start becoming official.
Well, so the disaffiliations, they're paying it forward for a bit. Even if they're keeping the unfunded pension liabilities in escrow, they're still getting an additional year of apportionments from a lot of churches that haven't been paying apportionments for a long time. So they're going to be flush for a couple of years, and then we'll see what happens.
Right.
So, but when you look at the Council of Bishops, we have now 32 active bishops in good standing. And then I wasn't sure, are you aware of any other bishops that lean right out of those 32? We know Karen doesn't. I already know a good 10 others don't, are far left and hostile.
I really don't know. There are bishops that we thought leaned right who aren't necessarily leading in that way. I believe there are bishops who do lean right in terms of sexuality and the traditional marriage, but who see themselves in good United Methodist tradition as being the pastor to all people, the bishop to all people, and so they're not going to in any way lift one side up over the other. And I think we have a few bishops like that who, even to the end, are being, I would say, overly fair or overly considerate toward those who are trying to tear down the discipline and change the teachings of the church. So I don't know if that directly answers your question, but
yeah. So I mean, what it really comes down to is how many bishops are going to lead and speak boldly, as at least two of the three bishops who have left did, and going to advocate for some semblance of traditional Wesleyan theology.
Yeah.
And if there are any left, I'm unaware of them.
Right. I'm kind of personally past the place where I'm keeping track of individual United Methodist bishops and where they are and the kind of the vote counting that I know you've been thinking about a little bit. But on being on Facebook, being on social media with people from a variety of different conferences, talking about disaffiliation, there are a few other conferences where the message of the bishop is to the people, this is a conservative conference. Mm-hmm. This is a traditional conference. We believe in traditional marriage here. It is not time to leave. There may be a better plan of separation in 2024. So I don't think those were the only three conservative bishops, but I do think they are few. And when we say conservative, I know we're primarily talking about we believe in the traditional definition of marriage according to Christian teaching. And there's been conversation in the last several years, so much conversation, but there are those who want to separate what they would call theological orthodoxy from ethical teaching. And I believe that's a false separation. When you try to separate, well, the theology is the creeds, the identity of Christ, the resurrection, etc. We can have orthodoxy and theology, but we're going to have heterodoxy, different teaching on ethics, including sexuality, that runs counter to what Christians have always taught as the boundaries of sexual expression. And so
I just know of so many clergy, whether or not they're, I don't know, I don't run around with bishops. I just know a lot of clergy that have personal convictions about sexual morality and propriety and human relationships that are willing to hold that belief privately, but then publicly are not willing to divide from other believers on it, are not willing to stand against the denomination on it.
Correct. So you have some bishops who are in the same place as your clergy friends
my
you're
assumption
speaking
has
of.
been that the only ones willing to rock the boat have left.